level. In your testimony, you described the new normal in Libya was a formerly intact country, now fractured and divided along many lines. Was there anything normal about the so-called new normal in Libya after Gaddafi? And could you elaborate on that?
Normal, by my definition, would be a functioning government that has intact a political process, a prospering economy, and a military that's disciplined and able to fend for the defense of the nation. As we've heard here today, the Libyans continue to struggle with as they move forward.
But particularly after the fall of Gaddafi, it becomes more chaotic. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Now, in your role as intelligence, could you highlight what you knew beforehand about eastern Libya? What were you predisposed as far as following intelligence?
Well, in eastern Libya, obviously that's where, for us, some of the rebel activity at the time began. Much of what we also watched in that area was who were what we would consider the good guys and the bad guys. What really were the roles that those forces were in, that were militias or others. When you are in the J2 shop, you're continuously trying to identify, especially forces that are not part of government forces. You are trying to discern all the time how friendly to our viewpoint are those types of forces. So we spent a lot of time on eastern Libya as well as other areas around the country, because it's so fractionalized by militia groups and entities that have varying interests. Some can be interested in their community being a safe place to live and prosper, and can be fairly what we would consider benign in their viewpoint. But then there are others where we would look at them and we would consider them extremists, whether they would be Islamist extremists or others. So constantly trying to keep track of what was going on around the country, not just even in that particular portion.
But in that portion, would you consider maybe a hotbed?
Oh, a hotbed, absolutely. That's where the strongest part of the revolution came from.
So a normal CEO or somebody that's receiving this intelligence has got to put a higher priority on that, right?
That would be one of the areas. That's one of the areas in that country to put the high priority on. Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, I want to go back to the accountability report from 1999 in Nairobi, Kenya. I mean, we outlined specifics that should have been in place. So State Department should have known. I mean, we just had Admiral Pickering, who was part of that discussion, sitting here in front of this committee earlier. They should have known, because if we'd have followed those protocols, we wouldn't have had this catastrophe. Do you believe that this event was totally preventable in Benghazi?
Totally preventable?
Yep.
No, not totally preventable. We're dealing in an environment, let me clarify my answer. The reason I don't believe it's totally preventable is because we're dealing in a hostile environment, in an environment where we're dealing with extremist organizations.
But
they're very.
But let me qualify that.
Okay.
Given the information that should have been normally going up the chain for somebody to make a decision, this was preventable.
Oh, in order to perhaps not even expose yourself and be there.
That's exactly. Are you familiar with the term malpractice?
I certainly don't want to have it happen to me. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm a dentist impersonating a politician, so I mean, America doesn't understand a lot of our jargon, and what happens is when an executive who's in charge of facilitating knows that the Inman standards of consulates do not meet those qualifications, that they're on a hotbed of activity, they knew something was coming along those lines, that you should have prevented this. Would you consider this malpractice?
By the definition that you gave, I would go along with that.
Ms. Shockey.
I am hesitant hesitant to agree, to be honest. And the reason is because of the confidence I place in the good judgment of Ambassador Chris Stevens, who made a set of choices himself about his engagement, his trip to Benghazi. And while I absolutely agree with you that the State Department should have been paying more attention to the growing jihadist threat and the militancy of militia in Benghazi, I would not want to take away from an American ambassador the ability to assess risk of accomplishing his mission or putting himself in harm's way, which I think Chris Stevens did a lot of in Benghazi, to tragic effect.
But doesn't he also have the impugned liability to those that are surrounding him as well?
It's an excellent question.
Yeah. Last one, Mr. Ross.
Quickly. Since I wasn't in the room, I can't speak to whether it was or not.
But given the circumstances of what we've seen played out by the information, there was definite neglect.
I think we see a lot of deficiencies, both in terms of what happened at the time and particularly...
And leading up to.
Well, both leading up to what happened at the time and also thereafter in the response. As you know, sir, malpractice is a very steep standard. So I couldn't speak to that, but the deficiencies are clear.
I thank the gentleman.
I thank